Hey, Mike, welcome back to Inspector Toolbelt Talk. How are you?
Going good. I'm good, man. How are you doing?
Hey, not bad. I feel like we have a magnifying glass on your life sometimes. You were on the show starting out, and then you were on the show when you first went multi-inspector. You were on the show when you're growing, and now um, you've gotten quite a big, decent-sized home inspection company, doing really well for yourself. Um, and I just feel like I don't know. It's like a montage, like a movie. Like you could play all these episodes together and watch you grow from beginner to, industry veteran. So thank you for
Yeah,
being back on the show.
I appreciate that. I think sometimes it feels like it's not easy, and I hardly feel like the grown up in the room most of the time. But I think it just comes down to learning from. I make a lot of mistakes. Like as many successes as I have, I made a lot of mistakes, and I think now and I'm okay revealing them so that anybody else can avoid making those same mistakes and kind of learn from it. Because I wish somebody was there to kind of tell me the same thing.
Yeah, and that's why we appreciate guys like you being on the show, sharing your experience, sharing information that one of our listeners said one time. He goes, "You'd have to pay somebody thousands of dollars and spend days and weeks with them just trying to figure this stuff out, and you guys just come on the show and talk about it for free."
Right.
It's not like we're paying you to be on here, but you're
I
just
know, right?
helping the industry, and I appreciate that. But
Yeah.
today we have a very specific subject, and you actually pitched this to me, and I really like the concept. We're going to talk about basically military veterans, police, firefighters, first responders, and things along those lines, people along those lines, and why they should consider being in the home inspection industry, and why, if we are a home inspection company, we should consider hiring them. Or third, if we're just a single inspector and we don't have any of that background, why we should get to know some of those people in our industry and in our area. And this is
Yeah.
something that I really appreciate because I've said this a lot. Whenever a police officer or a veteran calls me and they say, I want to get into the home inspection industry, one of the first things I say is, perfect. You were built for this. We're going to go over some of the reasons why, but some of the most successful people I've seen in the industry have a military background. Um, Police one, Juan Jimenez, he teased me one
Mhm.
time. I said ex-Marine on one of our podcasts. I'm like, oh no, not an ex-Marine, a Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine, right? And firefighters,
Yeah.
why these guys do so well in our industry. And so there's a little bit of something in this for all of us, whether we're of one of those backgrounds or not. But what made this come to your mind as a podcast theme there, Mike?
Yeah. So a little bit of background for me. When I was 17 and a half, I joined the Army. This was back in 2000, the end of 2005, 2006, I believe. Um, and I really, I needed my parents to sign the form in order for me to join because I was underage. And what it really did was, it opened my eyes to a lot of accountability, discipline, patience, being able to deal with harsh conditions and environments in order to be able to have that kind of patience. I wasn't the smartest guy. When I did my ASVAB test, it was I only qualified for infantry, which turns out it's not the hardest job to get, but it feels like the hardest job to do at the time. And when I deployed overseas, especially in Iraq, a lot of the stuff that went on, a lot of the things that I had to do and saw, it put a lot of things in perspective for me. And I know that a lot of fellow veterans and even first responders have dealt with high stress situations that
Mm-hmm.
focus them and give them experience that you wouldn't be able to get in the civilian world or otherwise. And what happens afterwards is that while you're struggling to transition from that high octane, high stress life that you're used to, where you're always on edge and everything, transitioning is difficult. So one of the things that's important is finding something that is that you can be proud of doing, something. So a lot of guys will go into the trades, or even veterans become first responders, or first responders sometimes become veterans. You need something to give you purpose, and something that challenges you, either mentally or physically. The reason why inspections turned out so great for me, I feel, is because, like most guys probably from my era, I have pretty significant ADHD, so I tend to like to think about a lot of different things at all times. But because of the military training, I was able to focus some of that. And for me, I like the challenge. I like learning. I like knowing more than the next guy, and then learning from the guy that knows more than me. So I understand the hierarchy of experience, and it was something that was very hard earned, I felt. But because of that, I think it gives me a little bit of an advantage when it comes to being able to deal with difficult clients, difficult homes, a lot of things happening at once, chaos. You can walk into a house and you could easily become overwhelmed. But some of that discipline that you get in overwhelming situations can help calm that nerve. And I think it's something that shows a lot in military veterans and first responders, definitely.
Yeah, the one quality that I've always said is one of the best from anybody with those backgrounds, and I was telling this just recently to a ex-police officer, and something that I had to learn in the inspection industry is how to command a room.
Hmm.
So, as a home inspector, if we walk in kind of wussy and we're like, "Oh, well, can I go in here now?" Or we're kind of, you know, we're not commanding the room, the
Yeah.
inspection gets away from us. Clients telling us what to look at first, and we're just doing what they tell us, going out of our pattern, probably missing things if we're used to doing the attic first and then the bedrooms after, and we're switching it around. It messes up, yeah, at least me, anyways, messes up my flow.
Yeah.
And just any of those backgrounds that we mentioned before, you can kind of walk in and you're used to commanding the room and you're used to dealing with difficult people. And people are stressed out in those situations. And for me, my first years in my career, because I don't have military, police, firefighter, or anything background, I had to learn, okay, I need to control this situation as best I can.
Yeah.
They've hired me to do my inspection, and
Hmm.
these outside elements I need to control.
Yeah.
Whereas when you have a background like yours, you kind of know, okay, there's chaos. Where do we focus this? And
Yeah.
that's an advantage. And I think that's an advantage if anybody's hiring a home inspector. Say we're expanding. You were just saying that your market's picking up. Markets are picking up all across the U.S. and Canada. We're seeing lots of good data, not flying off the charts, but at least it's not the nosedive we saw last year. We
Exactly.
talked about this in one of our recent podcasts. But as we do that, we might be thinking, okay, who should I hire? And a lot of times, the first thing we think of is, how about that contractor buddy of mine? Or how about that HVAC contractor that I met on the inspection one time? Maybe he'd like a side biz.
Hmm.
Whether you're listening and you're thinking about getting into the home inspection industry as a veteran or as a firefighter or anything, but that's great. But as we're hiring, think of those kind of people too. Do you find that they are a good hire when you've hired them in the past?
Yeah. So I think the best thing, if you can, I think most of these professions can identify that the the structure that InterNACHI has, the standards of practice, the SOP. There's SOPs in the military. Basically, everything has a handbook. Whatever job you have, there's a ranger handbook, there's a sniper's handbook, there's a infantry handbook that tells you exactly what your job is, what you need to do, and how you need to do it. I think that something like that can give great comfort and structure to someone who has been used to having structure for the majority of their career in the military or as a first responder. And because of that structure, you're able to kind of have these basic orders to follow. And even if you're the one giving them to yourself, let's say you're a solo guy, I think it's great because what it does is it gives you a set of rules that you have to follow, and then you can exceed them, and then expand your knowledge on them. And if you're looking to work for another company, the way that you can stand out is by having that discipline to be able to say, I'm not saying you have to become a yes man. I'm very much a big advocate of not being taken advantage of. So here's the only thing that I know I can speak for veterans that I've seen and I've met, including myself. We become kind of a doormat because we take orders so easily, and we're the guy. Like if you have a group of guys that's standing around, the general civilian, someone that doesn't have any military background, and somebody comes in, a boss comes in and says, "Hey, I got this really big crawl space. It's muddy. I need somebody to go in there." Most guys won't volunteer for that because they're like, "Man, that sucks. I don't get paid enough for this, all that." Most military guys are just like, "You know what? It sucks. I'll do it. Fine," because they're used to crappy situations where you're just forced to do something you don't want to do, so they can already accept defeat right away and take that order. I think that's the only thing that you might have to curtail, because when you're working for some of these larger companies, the home inspection industry is not immune to bad management, and you
Hmm.
have to make sure that you protect yourself as far as what you're contributing versus what how you're being taken care of. I pride myself on making sure that I don't, go out of my way to just give pats on the back, but provide real value to anyone that works for me. That they see that I appreciate them, because they're in it for the money, and that's a value that I give them. And anytime they do anything above and beyond what I expect of them, then that's how I reward them, not with pats on the back or a birthday cake, but with, hey, you did a great job. Here's some extra cash. Here's a bonus because you did a great job. I hope that you do it in the future. And then what that shows them is that there's a mutual respect, and there's an understanding that, hey, while all you have to do is follow these basic orders, when you go above and beyond, you'll be rewarded for that. Whereas in the military, it doesn't matter how far beyond you go. I remember my first paycheck from the Army. I think it was um, they give you a paycheck every 1st and 15th. So my first paycheck was $480 on the first 2 weeks of work. And I worked. You start at 5 a.m. and you're done at like 10 p.m. or you stay overnight and all that. And I was so happy to have that. And I think I got used to being happy to have that when I got out of the Army. I went to get my first job, and I was like, "I'll work. You're paying me what, $900 for 2 weeks of work? That's insane. I'll work however much you need. I won't clock in for overtime." I was just going out of my way to people please because I thought that that's what I was required to do. I think with hiring a veteran, hiring a first responder, you have to be mindful that they'll do whatever they need to make sure that they're successful and they work hard for you. Don't forget to take care of them. And if you are also going to be working for a bigger company, look out for your own well-being and your own interests, because unfortunately, even me, as hard as I try, the first thing on my mind is, I hope they're doing okay. I hope that's not the first thing on my mind, because I have a million other things I'm managing. So, accountability is a big one. But yeah, it's definitely a great choice when you're making a hire, because there's that dedication. It's just, you have to understand who it is you're working with.
You said something in there. You said the home inspection industry is not immune to bad management. I would take that actually a step further, step farther or further. Uh, I think the home inspection industry is more prone to bad management. And I say that because oftentimes people who start a company aren't the people that do the work. Oftentimes they start a company and they, like if you're a tech company, you get money, you get investors and all that stuff. Or let's say you start an HVAC company and maybe it's a family business or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, but here it's usually we're a guy that does a really good job and then we hire other people to help us.
Hmm.
Oftentimes the business management kind of goes by the wayside
It
because we
does.
were never built that way. We were built as somebody who could, you know, do take care of the work and not necessarily the business. That's why, unfortunately, some home inspection companies hit a ceiling with their growth. It's because they need to be able to manage outside their business. Anyways, I
Yeah.
digress. The reason I bring that up is we could measure our business acumen, how we run our business, if we do hire people with those backgrounds, like a veteran. If
Yeah.
they're just kind of floundering or they're like, "Hey man, just tell me what to do." They're used to really good structure. The
Yes.
army, the military in general, they're used to working on structure and everything trickles down and is usually extremely orderly. So
Yes.
if
Yeah.
they're floundering, maybe we need to step back and say, "Oh man, maybe I need to work on my structure. Do I have a handbook? Do I
Yeah.
have an HR person?" I think you mentioned that on the last podcast. When they do
Hmm.
this, do they have an SOP to follow? If they did
Exactly.
something wrong, did I not give them the right information? It's actually a good gauge of our business.
Yeah. And some, unfortunately, don't. I also, with that advice, I also caution not to take it too far. So one of my biggest pet peeves, and it's a private pet peeve, but it's okay to talk about, is that you know, I see this a lot in corporate, even in medium to small size companies. There's this thinking of, you know, there's a comparison to, let's say, just an average work place and a military structure. An example would be when they use words like boots on the ground, or when salespeople talk about, you see these videos where they're hyping each other up, and they're having these conferences, and they're like, we got to attack, we have to, this is a battleground, this is a, it makes it there. What's happening is that, a lot of these influencers were like, I'll come onto your sales force and we'll train them, and we'll make them, complete, we'll make them tacticians, we'll make them, warriors for your sales team. And it's like, if you take it too far, then what happens is that there's this disconnect with either the veteran or either any regular employee that you have, is that what you're doing is that you're giving too much importance and too much seriousness to something that can be as easy as a conversation. If you send an email and say, hey man, we got to get boots on the ground, we got to battle this out and get this done and taken care of, we have a mission to accomplish. It's like, okay, calm down, we're just gonna go send out some flyers. It's really,
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those things where you have to take because if you have good structure, then there's no need for the extra fluff of that. It's kind of like when you talk to chat gpt and you ask it for some details and you tell it no fluff, it removes those extra words that make it tell you these unnecessary, what it does is it makes it to where, if you're an inspector who all you've done is been an inspector and you know how to do that really well, and you're struggling to move into a management position to manage another inspector, you have to make sure that you understand that it is a relationship, but it's not a personal one, it's a professional one. And you have to limit how much, how personal it can become, because you don't want to pry into people's lives. But you also have to understand that at the same time, what you're asking of someone is to follow your direction, and they'll follow it willingly if you lead by example. They'll follow it willingly if they see that you're putting effort into your own roles and that your roles are clear. I make an effort to remind my guys that, hey, here's how the week's going to go. I have inspections in these areas, you guys have inspections in these areas, we're all going to be out there today together. If you need anything, text me or call me, or call my wife, or however they can do it quickly to get a hold of someone if we run into any snafus. And then we handle it task by task. But when you create these leadership roles, and I've seen it happen in companies before, where it becomes a bit too serious and they take it too serious, then there's that disconnect. And all employees will always complain about their bosses and about their work. You're not going to be their best friend, because you're going to make your own mistakes, and they're going to be the ones that pay for it. Whether it's a late one day on payroll, or you forgot to put in a mileage report or something like that, they're going to blame you. And you have to take it with stride, even when there's mistakes, because there is going to be that phone call. Hey, your inspector came out, and the weather stripping on the front door is missing, and a mosquito's got in, and then they get, oh wow, I can't believe, did we get a thorough inspection? And then you can use that and say, hey dude, what the hell, you missed this? Or you can say, hey, I got a call, this was bound to happen, weather stripping on the door, something I've missed maybe once years ago. This is something that you can work on. I bet you it won't happen again, because it's going to sear in your mind, hey, I can't believe I missed that. And now you can move forward. If it happens again, that's a more serious conversation. But talking to veterans or first responders, they listen very well. And if you really develop a rapport, then you don't have to deal with conflict like that.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Is basically it comes down to listening, and sometimes that's the hardest part. Is you tell somebody go inspect the attic,
Yeah.
and then they're off in the kitchen. They're like, oh, I'll get to the attic after I'm done with the kitchen, and it's just the listening, but also not taking it too far.
Yeah.
I was thinking about an example. There was a guy I was talking to, I don't know, probably a couple of years ago now. Did you get that thing, Mike, where you're like, oh, this happened yesterday, and it was like 3 years ago, or
Yeah. It
then
happens
he's
every
like,
day.
this was years ago, and it was like a month ago. So
Yeah.
I don't actually remember when at this point, but I was
Yeah.
talking to this guy, and he's a fireman,
Uh-huh.
and he became a very successful home inspector as a one
Yeah.
man show. He was at the max of what he could do, raised his prices, did the whole 9 yards. And he called me about how to hire and who to hire.
Hmm.
And he was looking at all sorts of people. And I'm like, aren't you a fireman? He goes, yeah. Yep. He was semi-retired. He goes, I do, 2 12-hour shifts or something like that. And then the rest of
Yeah.
my week is inspecting. And I'm like, are there other guys out there that work 3 days in a row and then have 4 days off? He goes, yeah, that's our standard schedule.
Hmm.
And I'm like, aren't firemen really good at climbing ladders, taking orders,
Yeah.
used to being wet and dirty and
Yeah.
overheated? And he's like, oh man, you're describing home inspectors. I'm like, yeah. And so that's what he does now is he hires within his firehouse. There's another
Yeah.
guy that I know, won't say where he is. He did that without me telling him to do that.
Yeah.
He's just like, man, firefighters and police officers, they make great home inspectors. And same thing with veterans. There's some veteran owned companies that only hire other veterans because they
Yeah.
know they can trust them. They know that they're going to work hard and they're going to get things done and they're going to listen. And
Yeah.
you don't have to tell you don't have to tell certain people twice,
Yeah.
you know. And I think people with those backgrounds, you tell them once and they're like, got it. And
Yeah.
you don't have to worry about the in between stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the thing is just being clear and clear with what your expectations are, not being around the bush and being direct is very much respected. Being around the bush is very much seen as a sign of weakness in the military. If you don't give a direct, like you tell me you need me to do something, I'll do it. But don't. If I don't do something, don't say, well, I thought you would do this. Well, then that comes forward. I was like, hey, well, we weren't told to do this. It comes down to being direct and being honest. And it doesn't have to be rude or blunt. It doesn't have to be, you don't, there should be there's no room for ego when you're managing people.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be willing to learn. You have to be willing to listen. You got to remember some of these guys that you're hiring, if this is they did their 5 years or 4 years in the military and they're looking for something else, they have, they at least made it to a leadership role near the end of their 5 6 years. So they at least made it to a role where they were in charge of at least 2 to 3 people. Okay, and that with itself comes with a little bit of pride and a little bit of ego that they can take orders, but at the same time they don't want to be babied either. They want to be able to be given responsibility and then be entrusted that they have enough discipline to follow their job accordingly. So you give them guidance, you show them what you do, and then everything will work out. And one of the big things that I see is there are a lot of programs out there. If you have trouble, you can't just go out and just like start screaming out any veterans looking for work. You know what I mean? There's
Mm-hmm.
there are great places here in California. I know that I've used the Skill Bridge program, which is a program for transitioning military personnel. That the Skill Bridge pays their salary or their hourly rate up to a certain amount of time while they're working and training with you. So basically, they cover those couple months of pay while they're training and even starting out, and then you can take over once they're fully trained, and then you hire them on as an employee. The program is meant to help veterans transition from being military. And there's also other ones like helmets to hard hats, things like that. And then your local VA. There's a lot of local VA chapters and veteran resource centers where you can put job listings up on boards, and again, as with anything else, like with construction, first responders, whatever it is, just because they are a veteran, just because doesn't automatically mean they're great,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
when I was in the army, there was some pretty bad eggs, you know what I mean? Guys that I wouldn't trust, as far as I could throw them. And there's, but that's far and few between. And then obviously, we come with a lot of stigma. Okay. It's, I don't know any other veteran who's gone to war, to Iraq or Afghanistan, and has seen combat like I myself have and my friends have, and doesn't come back with some kind of wound, whether it's visible or not. And that stigma is obviously attached to all of us, and we understand that 100%. I have family that's in law enforcement as well, and there are stigmas that come with that. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And I think everybody loves firefighters, so that's not fair. But still, it's like it's one of those things. It's it's there are stigmas attached to each of those professions, and because of that, there's that fear, like, oh, they're going to see me as some crazy PTSD veteran and not hire me. So there's always that. You always have that disadvantage and feeling of not being looked at, with a fair lens. Even though a lot of companies try to make their best, they give extra points and interviews and stuff like that for veterans, and everybody greatly appreciates that. There's still that stigma, and and it's unfortunate, but it's standard out there that I've seen.
Yeah, it's funny though. Before this podcast, I was going over home inspectors that I know, home inspection company owners. And listen, we're not saying if you're not a veteran, firefighter, police officer, whatever, you're not going to make a good home inspector. It comes down to the person, but there are some advantages. You said if you were in the military, let's say 4 or 5 years, you would be almost guaranteed to have at some point been in a leadership role. So you could have somebody at 22 years old already having experienced leadership roles in a high intensity situation.
Yep.
I mean, what 22-year-old does that? I mean, it's hard to find anybody with leadership experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, well, I was a leader of a 3-person sales team for Cisco. It's like we sold phones and I worked by myself and these other 2 people did whatever, There's a difference between I have direct contact and I'm leading people. So there's some advantages in there. Like I said, I use myself as an example. I'm a successful home inspector, but to be frank, there were a couple of years there where I had to learn something that somebody would have already learned who was military, police officer, or firefighter. But anyways, I digress. I'm thinking of one of the biggest home inspection companies. I won't say the states because people figure out who they are. But I'm looking at my map of clients and basically just home inspector friends in the industry. Some of the larger companies in the country, in the U.S., I don't have much data on Canada at the moment, are run by veterans, firefighters, ex-police officers, and first responders. I would say better than half.
Yeah.
Of the ones I'm looking at right now. So that's saying something. We're thought of as an industry made up of, ex-contractors like me.
Yeah.
But you listen to the show, Jay Wynn. He's an ex-contractor, and me and him always joke we had to unlearn being contractors.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that took time. So any ex-contractors out there, if you're struggling right now, wondering why people aren't getting your inspection, or maybe we've already learned this looking back saying, yeah, I get what Ian's saying. We had to unlearn bad habits. We walk into a room, kind of not pay attention to the people around us, give an estimate and walk out. We're looking at things from a different angle. We have to step back and say, okay, there's people here. How do I bring the room together? How do I command the room? What are the vital things? I'm going to find problems. How am I going to convey this information? It's a different skill set.
Yeah.
So knowing how to fix something and recognizing defects and bridging the technical to the human, very different skill set. It's an advantage for anybody who is a veteran or any of those other backgrounds because you're used to that. Even talking about police officers. So, I mean, a police officer has to walk into other people's homes a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Command a room with difficult people who are at their worst emotionally and
It sounds like a real estate transaction.
yeah, it sounds like a real estate transaction, right? And they have to find things that are wrong, not fix the issue, but identify them, convey the information properly, and then write a report about it later. I literally just described a home inspection.
Yeah, and nobody's happy at the end, so that's it.
And nobody's happy, and you have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to be, and let's be frank about our job too. You have to have no squishiness.
Yeah.
If we are squishy and somebody calls us a doo-doo head and a bad home inspector, yeah, that can bother us. Maybe we have some pride, whatever.
Yeah.
But we have to be used to being called all sorts of horrible names behind our back, people saying things. We have to have some grit, you know? And that takes time to develop. If you can develop that before you get into the home inspection industry, more power to you because, man, I've been called some awful things.
Yeah,
You
I
know.
think it comes down to you have to be you can be disciplined, but there are little victories you can have. I think a month or two ago, a listing agent was beyond extremely rude and
Hmm.
dismissive of me, right? Doing the inspection, okay? And I'm used to dealing with listing agents that don't want me there at all. Um, but there are little things that I do to make it more fun for myself. So I go in, and it's a little bit of a warm day out here. It's like 85 degrees, so that means the house is around that because the AC hasn't been on. Listing agents inside, relaxed, comfortable, and they're just being rude and not all that. And which I've had that before. Turn on the AC, test the registers, check temperature difference, all that. And then I turn on the heat to about 85 degrees, and then just leave it like that for about an hour and a half.
We're not endorsing smoking out your rude agents, folks, but
They're
still
like,
quite funny.
and then I love how they say, "Oh, looks like the heat works." I'm like, "Yeah, I just got to check it for a little while longer. I'm gonna go look at the furnace, see how the burners look." I went into the attic and I laid down next to the furnace and I looked with my flashlight, took my time, every burner, every flame, and then I hear them walk upstairs. Hey, you done testing the heater? Oh, I'm still evaluating the heater. It's like, oh, okay. And they're just like sweating, drip. I'm already used to it. I'm sweating in the attic. I'm like, this is fine. I can accept this. But they were not expecting, with the way they were dressed, to be sweating like this and hating life and all that. Because it's warm outside and it's hot inside. So little victories, help you through morale, I guess. But that's stuff that comes with experience and time.
You want an Ian side story, as
Yeah.
David likes to call it on our show here. So one of my very first inspections in my career, I was inspecting a boiler, and I live in the Northeast. Our heating units are a little bit more important than
Yeah.
some parts of the southern country.
Yeah.
So I turned the heating unit on and I let it run for about 5 minutes. And this particular type of boiler has an inlet valve for the water,
Hmm.
and it was clogged. So it had
Oh.
just enough water in it to run for about 10 minutes.
Mm.
And
Okay.
then it would have a gauge that would overheat, and then it would turn itself off. So
Okay.
I let it run for 8 or 9 minutes on a hot summer day. And I'm like,
Yeah.
everything worked fine, was beautiful. And it wasn't my fault, quote unquote, unless I took that pipe off and saw, or
Yeah.
ran it for over 9, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And my clients didn't blame me, but afterwards they're like, oh, the HVAC guy said you would never have found it, this or that. On the hottest summer day, I will run every AC unit for 15 to 25 minutes. And people hate my guts when it's 97 and I'm running a heating unit. And I'm like, but you know what? It's literally never happened again after thousands of inspections. It was a freak accident.
Yeah.
But just a little side story of,
It's
letting the
it
heating unit run, even if you're going to smoke people out.
It's always like that. I run a dishwasher cycle. Everything
Yeah.
drains, and then they move in, and then their dishwasher leaks. It's like, okay, you struggle with what to say. You're like, on the normal cycle is fine. For some reason, when we put the steam on or whatever, it starts leaking. And I say, okay, well, and then it comes to find out it's just the seal between the door and the dishwasher. It's different when the steam's on. And I was like, okay, well, that's not something I could have known, but you feel for people in those situations. And then, but they try not their hardest not to blame you. But then, sometimes you'll deal with actual, Karens, unfortunately. That there's a lot of red flags when you go into an inspection. Well, they're like, hey, do you offer a warranty? Do you have E&O insurance? Do you have liability? I'm like, man, I don't even know if I want to schedule this inspection at
Yeah,
all.
exactly. Those are big red flags.
Yeah, I'm like,
Do
the inspection fee will be $1,900, and yes, we have all that,
you-
and I have some extra forms for you to sign too.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Do you
So
as another side point, I always took pictures of every data plate on every appliance, and I took a picture of the appliance. Most
yes,
most of the extra pictures would just go into my file. I've had
yeah.
many times, not just a few, many times where people have switched out the appliances, and one time where a person switched out the heating unit.
Oh wow.
And
Okay.
they're like, "This thing is so old. You said it was 5 years old." And I'm like, "That's not the same heating unit." I'm like, "Check your report, and here's the pictures." And they're like, "Oh my gosh, you're right. Thank you." And that was the end of it for my end of things.
Oh
So I
yeah.
always take just a. Do you do that or no?
Yeah, so we take pictures of everything. We've learned. Okay, so recently we had a client upset, they left a voicemail saying, "Hey, you know, if I would like my inspection fee refunded, or I'm going to have to go to my attorney because I have to pay about $10,000 worth of repairs." I was like, "Okay, well, if you're telling me you'd be okay if I just gave you the $500 back versus getting $10,000 out of me for some repairs that are my fault, let's look into it." And it turns out, there was an access to a hidden part of the crawl space, like a sectioned part off the crawl space, that was in a closet, and it had a bunch of personal items in it. But because the photo of the closet interior wasn't in the report because there was no defects, it was just a closet. It wasn't, they were like, "Oh, well, I don't see anything about this access point in the report. They missed it. And so we go back to our photos and we're like, "Oh, look, here's that closet you're talking about. And the floor is completely covered with personal
Hmm.
items, all that stuff, and wall to wall stuff." And it's like, "Oh wow, you got me." That's what they said. It's like, so it's really one of those situations where we because of situations like that, we take pictures of everything. We take pictures while we're testing with the FLIR, the thermal imaging gun, of the oven, of the registers, of the returns, of all the walls and windows, everything. And every time we turn something off, we take a picture of our finger on the off button. So for the oven, the AC, everything else, because we get those calls. "Hey, you left the
Hmm.
oven on." "Nope. Here's the photo." "Hey, you did this. There's a hole in the wall." I'm like, "Nope. They did that when they were moving out because there was no hole when we were there." Stuff like that. It's unfortunate, but it happens a lot.
Oh, it does. I probably told this story too. Took a picture of a fridge, of a wine fridge, and
Yeah.
it showed that it was on. Everything was fine. Somebody must have turned it off after I left because I always videotape myself going out of the inspection,
Yeah.
and I turn it off as my vehicle pulls away.
Mhm.
Um, so they tried to get me for 6 grand worth of wine that went bad.
Oh wow. No.
And I'm like, "Well, here's the picture and the video, and you can see the fridge in the video too, of me
Yeah.
leaving the property." So, and I remember the listing agent ended up paying for it, and he goes, "You got me good there." I'm like, "I didn't get anybody. I'm just taking a
I've
video."
been.
Anyways, we digress. Well,
Yeah. All right.
going
But
going back to what's that?
well, everybody makes mistakes because my last little
Yeah.
one, my very first inspection, my very first one, I tested an outlet in the garage for GFI, and it did not have the reset button on it. And yeah, and then the groceries went bad
Yep.
in the fridge in the garage. So I ended up having to pay. Well, not having to pay. I offered to pay to replace all the groceries. Thank goodness they didn't have some Wagyu, $800 an ounce steak in there or something. But
Yeah.
I was like, that was 100% something that I'll never test. I never tested an outlet after that. That wasn't specific. Like I wasn't able to trace back or anything. That's where I learned that lesson. And that I never thought of before. But you learn like that by making those mistakes.
Yeah. It's a rookie. I've made that mistake before too.
Yeah,
But going
exactly.
back to like veterans, firefighters, police officers, first responders, to kind of sum things up, what do you think might be holding some of them back from entering the home inspection industry, or why might some hesitate to hire them, or what are some last bits of advice that you could give? Anything to kind of sum up the our
Yeah.
subject here.
Oh, so, most people looking to hire home inspectors, like myself, they're not looking for someone that's been doing This is a field where I actually prefer not having someone that's been inspecting for a long time, when it comes to experience, because every one of us has our, even though we all follow the same SOP, I do inspections completely different than my competitors. We all do.
Yeah.
So I want someone that I don't have to brush away bad habits. I can give them like the core of how I do things. And there's that fear of like, if I don't have any experience doing this, then I don't want to apply for this job and be let down and all that stuff. No, actually, great. Right, today is the 23rd of April, right? I'm looking to hire in Los Angeles right now. If you're a veteran, you can send your resume to me because I need someone that is willing to work and learn and be trained and go on ride-alongs. And it's gonna suck because it's the summer and I hate training in the summer. But it's one of those things that you shouldn't have that fear of reaching out. there's a lot of inspection companies that are out there, and there's like just one guy and a couple guys just like me, and we're always looking because it gets busy. And there are the big inspection companies as well that work more like what you're probably used to with big structure and all that, if you're comfortable with that. But the fear of, I put my job listings on Indeed, or I put them sometimes on Facebook, but with those you don't really get good responses, or the kind of responses that you want. And you need to really look out there. There are companies that are hiring right now, and necessarily the only thing that really I look for is just having the certification. And Raji shows me that you're committed to doing the work, because honestly, the certification by itself is just the baseline, and then we have to grow you from there. And so it is starting over, doing something different, but there shouldn't be a fear. We don't judge based on what service you were in or your age or anything. It's really just, getting to know you, getting to know what you can do. And it's a lot of driving, it's a lot of, I guess if you're a veteran looking to get into home inspections, it comes down to the home inspection part, honestly, becomes the easiest part. Okay. It becomes the easiest part after a while. This job isn't for you if you're not a little bit interested in learning new things every day. There isn't a day that goes by where I don't learn something new or change the way I thought of something. That literally happens to me every day in this job. I completely either change the way I've seen something before or learn something new that I didn't know before, because we're not responsible for knowing. I feel like it's funny that plumbers or electricians or roofers will come out and they're surprised. How do you not know all this stuff about the roof? Like the way we install them nowadays. And I'm like, well, if it's something really specific or a really specific code reference from an electrician, I tell them, like, man, look, I got to know all the electrical as much as I can, and the plumbing, and the roof, and the HVAC, and the foundation, and the framing, and everything else. It's really just you have to be inquisitive. You have to ask questions. And a lot of companies hiring, we look for stuff like that. Managers look for someone that's like, they're not waiting to be told what to do. They are also asking a lot of questions because they're genuinely interested in the job. And this is a job that requires a little bit of passion to do it. You are helping people and you're making money for doing it, and you don't have to make or fix anything, which is great. It's the best part of the job. You just walk in and point everything out. But I think that veterans or first responders or looking for this type of work, it can seem daunting. It can seem like there's so much you have to know, but it really comes down to sticking to your SOP, taking as much knowledge as you can from whoever's training you, pulling out as much value as you can from the ride-alongs, making an effort to be flexible to a point where you can go to these ride-alongs, you can commit, because if you show commitment to me, then I'm obliged to be committed to you, and therefore we work well together. But yeah, I mean, it's not scary. It's definitely not the scariest thing you've ever been through, that's for sure. So yeah, send that resume in, apply for that job, because as time goes by, it's a necessity. People are going to need it. AI is not taking over, and I crawl. You have to smell. You use all your senses.
Mm-hmm.
You listen for things wrong. You smell for things wrong. You can touch, and you can touch a drain and see if it's wet. You can smell a gas leak. There's a lot of things that are involved in being a home inspector. So it's an industry that's hot right now. Just, if you haven't started a company, start a company now. If you're going to do that, if you want to think about working for an inspection company, apply to all of them as much as you can. And get the first one that takes you, go for it, because you know what, if it doesn't work out, you can just move to another one. If it doesn't work out, if this is what you're passionate about doing, then do it. Because honestly, I wouldn't be where I was if it wasn't for my ability to be curious about all the workings of a building, and this is a great opportunity for people that are transitioning out of the military.
Mike, as always, thank you very much for sharing your insight and expertise.
Yeah.
And anybody listening who has any of those backgrounds that we mentioned, listen to Mike. And thank you very much for being on the show. We'll look forward to having you on again.
Sounds good.
Thanks.